This is Today as It Happened. Good Wednesday evening. I'm Holly Furfer, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news. From former FBI Director James Comey's motion to dismiss the charges against him, to new developments as states aim to redraw their district maps in order to get a partisan edge in Congress. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day.
Workers stand up and strike. Workers stand up and strike. And the bosses don't treat us right.
Hundreds of people protested in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina against federal immigration enforcement actions in their state. The operation began last week in Charlotte, where officials say more than 130 people have been arrested. Federal officials say the operations will reduce crime, though leaders in both Charlotte and Raleigh report crime is already down. A Russian drone and missile attack killed 20 people, including 2 children, in western Ukraine overnight. The strike hit 2 9-story apartment buildings. Emergency crews searched the rubble for survivors. At least 66 people were injured, including 16 children. Russia fired 476 drones and 48 missiles at Ukrainian targets, with air defenses intercepting most of the cruise missiles. Russia says it targeted energy facilities and military sites in retaliation for Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. Harvard University is reinvestigating connections between its former president, Larry Summers, and Jeffrey Epstein. Recently released emails show Summers maintained a friendly relationship with Epstein after the financier pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from an underage girl in 2008. Summers announced Tuesday he's stepping back from public commitments, including resigning from the board of OpenAI. An earlier Harvard review found Epstein visited campus more than 40 times after his conviction and was given his own office. Summers called his association with Epstein a major error in judgment when asked about the emails last week. The former Treasury Secretary served as Harvard's president from 2001 to 2006. Former FBI Director James Comey wants a federal judge Wednesday to dismiss his criminal case. Comey's lawyers argue the prosecution is vindictive and rooted in President Trump's personal hatred of him. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us now live outside the courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia. And Stephanie, you were in that courtroom, so tell us what happened today.
Hey, Holly, good afternoon. Well, this hearing today lasted a little less than an hour and a half, was scheduled to talk about that vindictive prosecution motion. And then it did take up a bulk of the hearing, the defense arguing that this case never would have been brought forward. Comey would never be under prosecution if it weren't for President Trump and his personal views of Comey and his personal disagreements, viewing Comey as a political ally. The government attorneys in court today saying that it was Lindsay Halligan and Lindsay Halligan alone who made the decision to move forward with this prosecution and present it to the grand jury. But it was actually discussion of the grand jury proceedings that I think is the most notable thing that happened out of this hearing. After the, discussions over the vindictive prosecution motion, the judge questioned the government attorneys on some of the grand jury proceedings, and there was a number of back and forth. There were a few moments where the lead attorney for the government needed to confer with Lindsay Halligan and another government attorney. There was a point where the issue the judge was taking was whether the indictment that Comey is actually facing was formally presented to the grand jury. Some of these questions are what we saw come up with a ruling that came also related to this case, but that came down on Monday. There was a moment in court today where the judge said, so Comey is facing a document that was never presented to the grand jury in the grand jury room. The government attorney saying yes. So there's definitely a lot of questions about how exactly the grand jury documents were put together, how the indictment was presented, and whether, the government and whether Lindsay Halligan, as the interim U.S. attorney, followed the proper procedures. There was a moment in court today where myself and some other members of the media sitting in the courtroom, we honestly wondered if the judge was just going to go ahead and dismiss this in this hearing today, but he did not. On the issue of the vindictive prosecution, he said he wasn't going to rule from the bench today, that there was a lot of weighty issues that he needed to consider, but he didn't give us a timeline on when he actually might rule on that motion. The only thing we know is the next hearing hearing scheduled for December 9th to consider other defense motions. But I would argue, Holly, we're probably going to have a lot of action happening between now and then the next time the Comey is expected to be in court.
All right, Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Thank you for that update. Now let's take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. Target's financial troubles continue to mount. The retailer posted another quarterly sales drop and cut its full-year profit outlook. The company has not seen sales growth in 4 years and recently announced plans to lay off 1,000 corporate employees. Target's current CEO, Brian Cornell, is stepping down after 11 years, with Chief Operating Officer Michael Fidelk set to take over next year. An international group of health experts is calling for government action against ultra-processed foods. 43 researchers published a report in The Lancet claiming these foods contribute to obesity, chronic illness, and premature death. They're calling for warning labels, taxes, and advertising restrictions on products like energy drinks, hot dogs, and instant oatmeal. Food industry groups argue such regulations could limit access to affordable, shelf-stable nutrition. Coming up on Today As It Happened.
AI chatbots tend to flatter users, a pattern known as sycophancy. This validation can feel good, but may not be right. AI chatbots endorse users 50% more than humans would on ill-advised behaviors.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's return to our briefing of today's top stories.
Continued concerns on Capitol Hill this week about the rapid rise of AI chatbots. Lawmakers are trying to navigate the benefits and risk of this new technology. To do so, now they are calling on psychiatrists and data privacy experts. AI has become a go-to tool for mental health support. Scripps News Business and Tech correspondent Mara Barrett spent yesterday afternoon watching as Congress tries to figure out exactly what to do with this revolutionary technology. Mara, what did the experts lay out for lawmakers in terms of the risk when it comes to AI behavior? And where is there room, I guess, for regulation?
Yeah, Del, all of this conversation, this hearing in which they're trying to shape potential regulation is coming in tandem with the fact that the FTC has asked a variety of AI tech companies to both submit reports on user safety and how they're tracking it and prioritizing it. There was also recent proposed legislation that you and I talked about a couple weeks ago that's making its way through the bill-making process. So it's clear that there's a lot of attention and awareness of the need for regulation, especially as AI has grown so quickly just in the last year, which was noted at the hearing yesterday. And the big thing that was brought up over and over again in the hearing was the prevalence of AI chatbots for mental health. It's something that you and I have talked about, I've covered extensively. The witnesses that we heard from two psychiatrists and a data privacy expert laid out that 25 to 50% of people are using AI chatbots for mental health. This was not what these tools were designed for. And so they don't have those ethical or clinical standards that licensed professionals are held to. And that's something that these experts called out as a problem. And then in terms of the guardrails that are in place, because we have seen response from a lot of companies like OpenAI, for example, putting in new rules and guidances for its technology to have age verification or prediction practices so they can kind of sense how old the user might be and what's appropriate there. The experts called this out as something that's pretty easy to bypass. And then in terms of other guardrails, in terms of what gets flagged if a certain question is asked, one of the other experts noted that when you talk with an AI chatbot long enough, if it's more than just a few back and forth questions, if you're having an extensive conversation, that's when those guardrails start to fall off, as if the AI technology almost forgets what its settings and what its trainings would be. And so that's something that they flagged as very concerning. And then the other point that was brought up pretty frequently is the fact that AI chatbots tend to cheerlead what users are asking about. They're not offering any friction. And I want you to hear from Dr. Wei, one of the psychiatrists who spoke to how detrimental that can be.
AI chatbots tend to flatter users, a pattern known as sycophancy. This validation can feel good, but may not be right. AI chatbots endorse users 50% more than humans would on ill-advised behaviors. They can also hallucinate, producing false or misleading information, and are not equipped to anchor users in reality. And when used in moments of emotional distress, AI chatbots can have crisis blind spots.
And so with all of these items noted, as lawmakers asked lots of questions on a variety of topics, experts ultimately said there needs to be a multi-layered approach when it comes to regulations, so that there are backups in place. If something falls through, like I mentioned with some of those guardrails, if someone figures out how to circumvent the AI's training, that's why having the backup plans in place is something that they recommend. They even went so far as to say that there is more research needed in this space, asking for funding for NIH specifically to look into some of that to then better inform lawmakers in their regulatory decisions. And I will say, listening to it, lawmakers felt largely informed in the questions that they were asking and seemed to be at the consensus that action needed to be taken quickly in terms of providing tangible policy solutions. Del.
Mara, there's also the issue of the big brother aspect of AI. The cell phone that's never off, the television that is always listening to you, the household appliances, your refrigerator, everything. What is actually private when you're using an AI chat box? Has there been any progress on that?
Yeah, and that's something that was brought up by several lawmakers yesterday, Del, the whole idea of when are you alone? When do you have any of that privacy, whether you're inputting it into a chatbot or it might be happening behind the scenes? And the conversation focused on voluntary conversations. So when you go and want to input information and get organizational answers or whatever people are using the AI chatbots for, and there was a two-pronged conversation around privacy. There's the idea of what you're putting in might not be private, and that's something that we've learned even from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman had said on a podcast earlier this summer. If they get subpoenaed or they need to submit documents for legal purposes, none of what you inputted is private. They can pull all of that history and disseminate it if they're legally required to. But then there's the opposite end of privacy and how AI training models are developed, whether you're putting information in and that's getting sent off to developers to train their system. So that means that could include your name, any address, any health information that you've been inputting. And a lot of that, these experts called out, are buried in the terms and conditions, which they also said, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, consumers often skim through or bypass. So I wanted to hear Dr. Torres, one of the data privacy psychiatrists who touched on the danger there.
If Americans' mental health data and stories and journeys are being used to train AI, people should give explicit informed consent and not a checkbox buried in the terms and conditions. That would be a tragedy if we let that happen, and you can prevent it.
So you kind of heard the directive there to lawmakers, especially as there are such little transparency requirements for AI developers right now. And so we heard these experts testifying, urging Congress, as they're considering regulation, to require companies to disclose that data sourcing and processing practices, and ideally a situation in which users are not having to automatically opt in for their content to be part of training. Del.
Yeah, perhaps you should ask members of Congress how many of them have ever read the entire terms and conditions before they check that box. I raise my hand and say I have not. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett, live for us in Denver. Mara, thank you very much.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
Do you think that redistricting in states across the country, led by Republicans, has been too aggressive, given what we saw yesterday in Texas?
Look, I have a long history of doing it inside of Ohio. Ohio actually got a bipartisan vote. I'm glad that the system worked in Ohio.
Thanks for joining us again on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
A federal court blocking Texas from using a redrawn congressional map that would have given Republicans 5 additional House seats. The judge is ruling 2-1 that the map amounts to racial gerrymandering and harms Black and Hispanic voters. That decision is a blow to President Trump's efforts to preserve Republican control of the House ahead of the 2026 midterms. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he will appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is live on Capitol Hill with the details. And Nate, this decision in Texas could really upend the 2026 midterms if it is not reversed.
That's exactly right. And look, Democrats taking a preemptive victory lap this morning, making clear that they view this as boosting their chances in the 2026 midterm elections. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, making these comments this morning at his daily press conference.
This whole notion that Republicans were going to be able to gerrymander their way into rigging the midterm elections, and Democrats in the House were just going to unilaterally disarm, roll over, and play dead was a fantasy. It was clear as day that Donald Trump and Republicans violated the 14th and the 15th Amendments of the United States Constitution. And then they jammed that gerrymandered map down the throats of the people of the great state of Texas in the dead of night. In California, it was a democratic process.
California, though, a very different situation, amendment to the state constitution to allow the redistricting of those districts to favor Democrats. It was originally a response to what happened in Texas. Now, what happened in Texas could potentially be reversed. Now, a judge has ruled, a panel of judges has ruled that it needs to be reversed for now. Obviously, the Supreme Court could weigh in on this one. There's a lot of questions about how soon they would do so. Obviously, filing deadlines and other things like that are approaching as we are less than a year away from the 2026 midterm elections. This could really potentially boost Dems' chances. And they got a little bit more good news today in the form of a poll from NPR, PBS, and Marist. This poll showing the Democrats have a 14-point advantage on the generic ballot, meaning that there's a 14 percentage point advantage. You can see there 55% of voters, if they went to the polls today, would elect the Democratic candidate. 41% of voters say they would elect the Republican candidate. So certainly, positive numbers there for Democrats to be excited about. Again, Republicans on Capitol Hill responding to that news, basically saying the only poll that matters is the one that voters will take next election day. Here's Senator John Husted, the Republican from Ohio State that just went through a redistricting process that will narrowly favor Republicans, or at least appear to narrowly favor Republicans. Do you think that redistricting in states across the country, led by Republicans, has been too aggressive, given what we saw yesterday in Texas?
Look, I have a long history of doing it inside of Ohio. Ohio actually got a bipartisan vote. I'm glad that the system worked in Ohio, and I'm not going to comment about what other states are doing. That's up to their governors and their legislatures, and the true mark of whether it was successful or not is what will happen next November.
The only poll that matters is Election Day, Del. And look, the Democrats got a lot of good news today, a lot of questions about whether that ruling in Texas could be reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. But either way, things are looking pretty good for Democrats to retake at least the House of Representatives in next year's midterm elections. Obviously, that generic ballot could certainly help Democrats in some of the key Senate races all across the country as well. A lot of questions about whether Democrats can beat the odds and win back the U.S. Senate. The House of Representatives, that seems like a more likely target. The Senate, they would need to win a whole lot more seats in a whole lot of states that we don't typically think of as swing states. That includes states like North Carolina, where Democrats would need to win the Senate race there. Alaska, Democrats would likely need to win. Iowa, another possibility as well. Look, there's a tough map ahead, but again, Democrats getting some good news yesterday in the form of both that poll, which came out this morning, and that ruling in Texas. A lot of questions, though, about whether the Supreme Court reverses it.
Regardless of what happens, election night for those of us who cover those things is going to be a long night, so buckle up. Nathaniel Reed, our congressional correspondent. Nate, as always, thank you very much.
Could the country soon be on the verge of a major health care policy debate that may make some health insurance plans cheaper? It's at least a possibility in the coming weeks here on Capitol Hill. So what are some of the ideas? And more importantly, could any of them become law? The cost of health care is one of the biggest issues facing the country. A recent Scripps News Talker Research survey found that 1 in 4 Americans report health care as their most important issue. An October AP NORC poll found about 6 in 10 Americans extremely or very concerned about health care costs going up next year. With Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, the odds of any new health care policy change likely starts with conservatives who are actively talking about policy changes ahead of premium hikes for millions taking effect in January.
We've got to be a little bit more creative than just the federal government throwing money at it.
One lawmaker to watch during this debate is Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, a doctor himself. Senator Cassidy's plan is different from what Democrats want because Democrats want to send billions of taxpayer dollars to extend subsidies expiring in December related to insurance plans created by the Affordable Care Act. The Cassidy plan calls for sending that money to healthcare flexible savings accounts instead, so taxpayers can pay for costs related to their health. He recently explained his plan on the Senate floor.
It goes to an account that she controls, that she can spend on her physician, her dental care, her prescriptions. We need to empower her.
Cassidy says he is working with the White House on legislation and believes a vote is possible before the end of the year. President Trump previously endorsed a version of this, posting on Truth Social, the taxpayer dollars should, quote, be sent directly to the people so that they can purchase their own much better health care and have money left over. But many Democrats on Capitol Hill are skeptical of that plan and do not believe such legislation can pass before January. Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, a key figure in this debate, is working with Republicans for an extension of existing Affordable Care Act subsidies, the same subsidies that were central to the recent government shutdown. Shaheen has indicated a willingness to potentially accept new income limits as part of a deal.
I'm 100% committed to getting this done.
Joe St. George, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
What a time to choose a time where families are coming together to celebrate one another and be together, that we have this effort being ramped up that's destroying families.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened, Scripps News end of day snapshot of our biggest stories. So let's pick up right where we left off.
Las Vegas police have released new video of an armed casino robbery late last Thursday night. The suspect approaching the cashier's cage with an AR-style rifle demanding money. Surveillance footage showing a security guard backing away after spotting the weapon. The cashier complied with the gunman's demands and escaped. The suspect was heavily disguised, wearing a ballistic helmet, sunglasses, face mask, and security-style jacket. More than half of your homes losing value last year, that according to new data from Zillow. It is the highest share of homes losing value since April of 2012. It's also a flashing red light for the housing market in this nation. Downturns are most widespread across the West and the South. Zillow saying the valuation drop reflects affordability pressures, high mortgage rates, and a weakening demand. The check could be in the mail. Amazon refunds going out to customers who the FTC says were tricked into joining Amazon Prime. Amazon settled that case for $2.5 billion. $1.5 billion will go straight to customers. Amazon denies it did anything wrong. If you're eligible, you don't have to do anything. Most of you will get about $51 automatically. That is the price, by the way, of a Prime subscription fee. In Washington, President Trump addressing top business leaders, administration officials, and members of the royal family during the Saudi Investment Forum in Washington, D.C. today. His remarks capping a two-day trip to the States by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It comes as the kingdom has pledged billions of dollars in new investments in American industries. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull is live now for us at the White House. And Haley, what did we learn from the president's speech today?
Well, the president is largely praising the U.S.-Saudi Arabia relationship, while at the same time in front of those business and foreign leaders praising his own economic agenda. During the two-day visit here in Washington, D.C. for the Saudi Crown Prince, we have seen a number of new measures rolled out. On the defense front, according to the administration, the promotion of Saudi Arabia to a major non-NATO U.S. ally, which makes things like foreign military sales easier but is not a guarantee. The signing of a strategic defense agreement, the promise of future sales of F-35s as well as American tanks, and all this as President Trump is looking to push his Gaza peace plan forward that requires monetary support and participation in an international stabilization force. Additionally, the Saudis announcing that they're upping their pledge to invest in the U.S. from $600 billion to $1 trillion. That is near the size of Saudi Arabia's GDP. The administration also announcing a framework for cooperation on critical minerals, a memorandum of understanding on artificial intelligence, and the completion of negotiations on civil nuclear cooperation. Now, during his remarks, the president Dell specifically touting deregulation efforts, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence, as he has also recently called for a federal standard in the United States. But notably, as this White House is so focused on the issue of affordability amid Americans' economic concerns, Dell, the president also pushing his agenda as working on that front, saying this.
We're also making incredible strides to make America affordable again. That's a new word that they're using. Affordability, they talk. They had the worst inflation in history. They had the highest prices in history. The country was going to hell. The only thing that we're going up in is our stock market, okay? The only price that we really have, I mean, we're bringing prices down, but they came up with a new word, affordability. And they look at we were all about affordability, and everyone assumes that that meant that, no, their prices were high.
And President Trump largely seeking to contrast his administration with the previous administration. Notably, in those remarks, Dal, he also was defending his administration's support for visas to allow companies to employ foreign workers, specifically to manufacture chips, saying that this is, quote, MAGA, standing for Make America Great Again. Of course, the term that the president has used to describe his agenda for so long, amid some criticism he has faced on that front as well, Dal.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Beaufort live on the North Lawn. Haley, thank you very much.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
We have seen lawlessness in the enforcement of immigration law. We've seen violence being used as the first response instead of the absolute last response.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Let's continue our walk through the day's top headlines.
Hundreds protesting today in Raleigh, North Carolina. That is where that city's mayor saying ICE is headed next. Last weekend, federal immigration agents conducted raids in Charlotte, North Carolina, where officials say they picked up 130 people. The Trump administration says the operations will reduce crime, but leaders in both Charlotte and Raleigh say crime is already down. New Orleans is also bracing for ICE. Yesterday, Homeland Security announcing it will deploy 250 border agents there. Operation Swamp Sweep, as it is being called, is its latest mission to arrest some 5,000 people. A former volunteer at a nonprofit says she was told not to come back to work after telling ICE agents to leave the property. She said that happened about 3 weeks ago. She described how it all unfolded with Ben Jordan from our Scripps News Group in Milwaukee.
Are you allowed on the property anymore?
I don't know. It's not a line I'm willing to cross.
After 2 years of volunteering at Milwaukee Urban Stables.
Being dismissed from your volunteer duties really means you don't have any business here.
Heather Asiyanbi says the nonprofit that combines the Milwaukee Police Department's mounted patrol horses with a mental wellness program for at-risk youth and veterans no longer wants her here.
We deal with kids who have various traumatic things, or just kids in general shouldn't see things like that.
It's because the last time Heather was here, on October 29th, she says she found these masked law enforcement officers staging in the parking lot.
It was shocking.
And told them to leave.
This very well could be the staging for an ICE raid. And so I said to him, you can't be here. Like, we do learning and therapy here.
Heather says she didn't see Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE on any of their uniforms, but she did observe agents wearing these vests that say ERO. It stands for Enforcement and Removal Operations, which is an ICE agency. It remains unclear why this group of officers was staged here, but Heather says they left within minutes at her request. Hours later, Heather tells me she received this email from the nonprofit's leader, saying her volunteer service with Milwaukee Urban Stables has ended.
She just said things to the effect of, you had no right to do that.
I requested an on-camera interview with Milwaukee Urban Stables leadership team. They declined. Instead, a public relations firm sent me a statement that says this was a one-time incident and occurred without the knowledge or permission of Milwaukee Urban Stables. It goes on to say, while the volunteer has a right to express their thoughts, those should have been first brought directly to staff members.
How did that make you feel?
It's very hard to stun me into speechlessness, but I was very nearly at that point, because how is it okay with you that this activity was taking place in this environment specifically.
Heather says she doesn't want her volunteer position back unless leadership changes at the nonprofit.
I hope they understand what a special place the stables are, but understand that leadership may be at odds right now with that mission.
I reached out to ICE to ask whether their agents were here, and if so, why. I have yet to hear back.
Ben Jordan, Scripps News Group.
At this hour, there is a controversial hearing unfolding on Capitol Hill. The Senate looking into those ICE raids that are taking place across the country. Controversial because, to begin with, the Democrats all walked out. Afterwards, witnesses painting a dystopian picture of Chicago and other operations unfolding, crime out of control, violent criminals being picked up. But is it an accurate picture? Jacqueline Watson is the first vice president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Ms. Watson, thanks for being with us. The witness is describing, in the words of the sheriff, tens of millions of illegal, violent criminals pouring across the border. Is that true?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. No, it is not true. It is not true that every person who is crossing the border is a violent criminal. In fact, the statistics say otherwise, that the immigrant population is less likely to have criminal records or be involved in criminal activities than native-born populations. So it's just not true.
I'm curious, who has the law on their side as this all unfolds?
Well, it's hard to say. Immigration law is one of the most complex areas of law, and there are many layers to it, but mostly it is administrative and civil in nature, not criminal. There are some provisions of criminal laws in the Immigration and Nationality Act, but the vast majority is civil. And in fact, the deportation provisions are all, in fact, civil.
Ms. Watson, mayors and civic activists are telling those being rounded up, you have rights. What happens if ICE doesn't care?
That's the big question, isn't it? It is true. You have rights. We all have due process rights under the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't matter where you're from or what your status is in the United States. However, we have seen lawlessness in the enforcement of immigration law. We've seen violence being used as the first response instead of the absolute last response. And it is difficult to tell people, yes, you do have rights. You do have rights under the Constitution when the people who should be following the Constitution the closest are not respecting those rights. My best advice is to try to stay calm, try to contact an attorney, and try to get yourself safely out of the situation as safely as possible and with as little injury as possible, in the hopes that an attorney will be able to vindicate your rights in a federal court. We have seen federal courts be willing, I should say, to enforce these due process rights when the enforcement agents have violated them.
Ms. Watson, I'm watching these ICE raids taking place across North Carolina. I'm familiar with the state. I actually worked there at one point in time. And I covered, of all things, the KKK. And one of the things that I found when I covered the KKK was that the laws changed. And now there are laws on the books saying the Ku Klux Klan cannot hide their faces. They can't wear those hoods over their faces. So my question to you is, why can ICE hide their faces when the KKK can't?
Simply because their higher-ups have allowed them to do so. I agree with you. I do not think this is right. In fact, can you imagine if these are people who are armed? These are people who are not identifying themselves. It's very hard to imagine law enforcement, who we traditionally think of as law enforcement, police, sheriffs, pulling people over and hiding their faces and hiding their identities and not identifying themselves. They do it because their bosses essentially have allowed them to do so. There's very little oversight and very, very little accountability.
I want to circle back to something that you said just moments ago. Very few people who are working in the landscaping business or picking tobacco in North Carolina or as a hotel and motel maid can afford a lawyer. Is the system being overwhelmed on purpose?
Oh, yes. I think that is a very, very good observation. The shock and awe of it all, the overloading, not just the communities with this kind of enforcement, but also overloading the systems, the administrative systems that are created to handle this. Increasing detention itself makes people less likely to fight their cases or even seek their rights. I understand it's very easy for me to say, contact a lawyer and have them fight for you, but practically, it's very hard to do when you have a family waiting for you, you're in detention. It's very hard to contact the outside world. And of course, there's always the cost, the monetary cost.
Final question before I let you go, and it circles back to something I just mentioned a second ago. I've actually covered immigrant groups, from those who worked in the tobacco fields of North Carolina to those who work at night in the offices of Washington, D.C. They come from all walks of life in just about every nation. Can you explain why, if we are a nation of immigrants, it appears that only one group is being rounded up?
Well, yes. How can I explain that? I can explain that only that this is the priority of the administration to create fear in a certain group of people. And for the most part, it might be working. All we can do is just try to band together and show that we, as a community, are not going to allow a targeting of certain groups just because of their background, ethnicity, religion even, and just push back to the extent that we can, using our talents, using our professions, using our volunteer time, and let this government know that we are united as a community and that we will continue to fight for everyone's rights, regardless of who you are.
Not putting words in your mouth, but are we looking at systemic racism?
You may put those words in my mouth. I believe we are, yes. I would say there are just too many examples and evidence to turn away from that possibility. And sometimes sometimes it's just said right in front of us. And we need to look at that, and we need to take those statements, actions, and evidence seriously when we are considering whether or not this is targeted racism and systemic racism.
Jacqueline Watson is the first vice president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Ms. Watson, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Judges have to, walk a tight line because they don't want to look biased, just like you said, because if they did, then they're going to have a recusal motion by the prosecutor.
There was a major development today inside a federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. The Justice Department admitting in court today that it did not give the grand jury a full presentation of its evidence against former FBI Director James Comey. Comey pleading not guilty to those 2-count indictments against him. They are for making false statements and obstructing Congress. Comey is seeking to have the criminal case tossed, arguing the prosecution is vindictive and rooted in former President Donald Trump's personal animus toward him. What prosecutors admitted today echoes issues raised in another hearing with a different judge earlier in the week. In that case, the judge asked why there were no records in the transcripts of what the grand jury reviewed. It's also raising eyebrows on interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan. She was an insurance attorney and Trump's personal defense lawyer before being hastily tapped as a U.S. attorney. Former current and defense attorney David Gelman joins us now. Mr. Gelman, thanks for being with us. This development inside the courthouse today, it seems to indicate that the prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, may not have presented everything to the grand jury. How significant is that?
You know what? I don't know if that's significant at all, honestly, because this is what's going to happen. In the event that the judge agrees with that and says, all right, we're going to just dismiss this, all the prosecutor has to do is just go back to the grand jury and represent the case. That happens a lot. So if a grand jury indictment is just dismissed, prosecutors' remedy, go back and do it again and just make sure you get it right this time. So I don't think there's that much of an issue on this.
In the case of James Comey, though, she was up against a clock. There were 3 days before the statute of limitations on the case expired. So can she now go back to the grand jury with this indictment, this modified or correct indictment, or will the clock have expired on James Comey's indictment?
No, that's a good question, but no, they can, because they're really rectifying a situation. So they can actually go back and do that again. The statute of limitations wouldn't have anything to do with it. Look, will James Comey argue the statute of limitations run? Definitely, but there is legal precedent to show that this did happen before.
Mr. Gelman, my sister teaches law, and I can actually hear her right now saying, if one of my students did this, what grade would she give him? Was this an issue of something that was sloppy? Is it an issue? How would you characterize this issue with regards to this indictment?
You know what? I would not want to be a student in one of your sister's classes if that would happen to me. It's probably a little sloppy, probably a little rushed. You know, I know the Ms. Halligan, that she was just appointed, a week prior to the indictment being presented to the grand jury. So obviously, you know, I don't know if they had all the T's crossed or the I's dotted, but, you know, this is, again, why you are able to have a grand jury. You are allowed to bring it back there again to rectify the situation.
I think both of us agree. I would not take my sister's law school class either. Comey's lawyers are using the president's own words against him. In this case, that tweet to the attorney general that he wants Comey prosecuted along with 2 others. How damaging are those Truth Social posts?
I think they may have a little impact, but is it going to be the end-all, be-all of the case? No, I don't think so, because, look, the president, he has to be independent from the DOJ. DOJ, they are a separate entity from the executive branch, and the executive and the DOJ will put on testimony showing that they are not acting under the will of the president. They're not acting under his instructions to go after Comey. Now, look, Comey, the defense attorneys, they're going to be yelling up and down to say, look, this is why he's here, because the president wants him to be going to jail because he went after the president. And, you know, I think they may have a little bit there, but in the end of the day, I don't think that's going to, again, move the needle on this that much.
How sympathetic are the judges in these cases? How does a judge, for instance, walk the fine line between not wanting to appear biased, but also wanting to make sure the rule of law is followed to the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law?
You know, look, every judge is different. That's the problem. And we've seen this judge particularly, you know, they've gone after the DOJ so far. So I don't think that they're going to give a lot of, you know, leeway, if you think about it, to the DOJ because of the mistakes that have been presented so far, potentially. But with that being said, judges have to, you know, walk a tight line because they don't want to look biased, just like you said, because if they did, then they're going to have a recusal motion by the prosecutor, meaning the judge is going to have to withdraw from the case if they show that there is bias or they do have a bias towards one of the parties.
David Gelman, former prosecutor and current defense attorney. Mr. Gelman, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for spending part of your evening with Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a fantastic Wednesday night.